You've probably heard the big ones. ADHD isn't real, you just need more discipline, everyone gets distracted sometimes. Yeah, we've been debunking those for decades. But there's a whole other layer of misunderstanding that doesn't get nearly as much airtime. Misconceptions that even people with ADHD believe about themselves. That people close to them, that sometimes even clinicians miss. And those are the ones that do the most damage quietly over the years, because they shape how someone sees themselves and whether they get the right kind of help. So today, we're going 5 layers deep. 5 ADHD misconceptions that are underreported, under-researched, and honestly, kind of blew my mind when I dug into the science. So let's get into it. Misconception number 1. ADHD is a focus problem. Okay, yes, the name literally has attention deficit in it. So this one feels pretty obvious, right? Dr. Russell Barkley, one of the most cited researchers in the field, has spent decades arguing that ADHD is better understood as a disorder of executive function and self-regulation, the brain's ability to manage its own attention, emotions, impulses, and time. And here's the thing that breaks the focus narrative wide open. People with ADHD can focus intensely when a task is interesting, urgent, and emotionally engaging. We're talking hours of hyperfocus on things that don't really matter sometimes, losing track of time entirely, being incapable of stopping even when we want to. So it's not the focus isn't there, it's that the ADHD brain doesn't have reliable directed control over where that focus goes. Dr. Michael Manos, an ADHD specialist at the Cleveland Clinic, describes it as a difference between directed attention, which is consciously choosing to focus, and automatic attention, which is being pulled toward whatever is engaging. The ADHD brain defaults heavily toward automatic attention. This distinction matters because when people believe it's just a focus problem, they can say things like, well, you focused on that video game for 4 hours, so clearly you can focus on whatever you want to. And that framing implies laziness or it's a choice. Misconception number 2, ADHD is about behavior. Emotions have nothing to do with it. This one is subtle, but it's actually pretty huge. Emotional dysregulation is not listed in the diagnostic criteria for ADHD. And because of that, a lot of people, patients, families, even clinicians don't always connect the dots to that. But the research tells a very different story. Significant, consistent evidence of emotional dysregulation across multiple studies. Things like low frustration, heightened irritability, rapid mood shifts, and difficulty returning to a calm baseline after an emotional trigger. The regions of the brain associated with emotional regulation, particularly the prefrontal cortex, show measurable differences in people with ADHD. Dopamine and norepinephrine, the neurotransmitters most directly involved in ADHD, also play a significant role in emotional regulation. So the same system that's disrupted in terms of attention also disrupts how emotions are processed and managed. If you've watched any of my videos, you've probably heard of RSD, which is rejection sensitive dysphoria. That's one specific manifestation, but the broader point is that emotional intensity, emotional reactivity, and difficulty de-escalating after an emotional event are deeply connected to how the ADHD brain is wired. Why does this misconception cause harm? Because people with ADHD spend their lives being told they're too sensitive, they're overreacting, or they're just being dramatic. And because emotional dysregulation isn't the official criteria, it often goes unaddressed in treatment, even when it's one of the most impairing symptoms that someone has. Misconception number 3, and I've seen this a lot in comments, people with ADHD are just bad at time management. They need to just try harder. Yeah, let me introduce you to the concept of time blindness, and it reframes this misconception completely. Most people experience time as a flowing, continuous thing. You have a sense of how much time has passed, how much is left, and what 20 minutes from now feels like. People with ADHD often don't have that. Researchers have described this as a deficiency in the internal clock, a genuine neurological difference in how time is perceived, not just managed. So in a peer-reviewed 2021 study found that time perception impairment is a focal, consistent symptom of ADHD in adults. This explains so many things that look like laziness or disrespect from the outside. Chronic lateness. Not because they don't care, but because leaving in 10 minutes just doesn't compute in the person's brain. Not a side effect, not a secondary trait, but a core feature of how the ADHD brain operates. So it's one of the most common symptoms that go undiagnosed often, or even seen. For someone with time blindness, there are essentially only two time zones. You have now and not now. And a deadline that's maybe 3 weeks away doesn't feel real until it's here. And then it becomes a crisis. Procrastination on long projects. The future doesn't feel real enough until the act is actually on. And hyperfocus, because when the ADHD brain locks onto something engaging, there's no internal clock ticking in the background saying, hey, it's been 3 hours, we need to get going. So one person describing their experience online put it this way: I look at the clock, think I've got 10 more minutes, blink, and suddenly it's 30 minutes later. You know, that's not a choice by them. That's a brain that processes time differently. This happens to myself. When I'm recording a video, I feel like I've been doing it for 10 minutes and it's been an hour. Well, when someone with ADHD has been told just to try harder, I love that comment, at being on time, we're asking them to do something that requires an internal resource their brain doesn't reliably provide. The solution isn't more effort. You can't be like, well, just try harder to be on time. It has to be external scaffolding, timers, alarms, visual countdowns, tools that put time outside the brain so the brain doesn't have to track it internally. Number 4, ADHD is a motivation problem. They just don't care enough. Yeah, this one's kind of painful because it's one of the ones that gets internalized the most. When I read this one, I think people think, oh, they're just not trying. If they really cared, or they're looking for an excuse of some kind, well, that's not true at all. So it's like, let's describe it as this. I know I need to do this. I want to do this, but why can't I just do it? And I think that's a really great way to put it, because you want to do it, you just can't. And here's the conclusion that people like to draw, the one that quietly destroys the self-esteem of that person. I must not care enough. I must be lazy. Something is wrong with me as a person. ADHD involves a measurable dysfunction in the brain's dopamine reward pathway. Adults with ADHD showed significantly lower dopamine function in those regions compared to controls, and that reduced dopamine activity was directly correlated with lower motivation scores on standardized assessments. In other words, the ADHD brain is not choosing to be unmotivated. It has a measurably reduced capacity to generate intrinsic motivation for tasks that don't provide immediate strong reward signals. So if you're not getting a big dopamine hit from it, you're just not going to see the reward in it. It's going to be harder to start that task. This is why people with ADHD can be highly motivated, even obsessively, for things that are genuinely interesting, novel, or with high stakes. The reward signal is strong enough to activate this system. But for low stimulation tasks like routine work, administration stuff, things that matter but aren't exciting, the dopamine system doesn't fire the right way in the neurological brain, which causes an issue. So it's not laziness, it's really just neurobiology. And this is important beyond just understanding ADHD, because the treatment implications are real. It's not try harder, it's how do we engineer the environment or use medication or behavioral strategies to compensate for a reward system that runs on a different fuel grade. So that's really important, because we can't just try harder. I mean, we want to try harder, of course, so we have to figure out a strategy that works or incorporate strategies. Another common misconception is that sleep problems are separate from ADHD. They're just a bad habit. So some people with ADHD might have a wacky sleep schedule. This one doesn't get nearly enough attention. Research suggests that up to 80% of adults with ADHD report some form of sleep disturbance, difficulty falling asleep, restless sleep, trouble getting up in the morning, daytime fatigue. I'm telling you, 80%. And you're probably thinking, oh, well, everyone has sleep problems. Well, it can also be an indicator of ADHD. And yet, sleep is rarely treated as part of ADHD. It's treated as a separate issue, a lifestyle problem, something to fix with better habits, like going to bed on time, getting up early. But the connection runs much deeper than that. There's also a circadian rhythm component. Many people with ADHD have a naturally delayed sleep phase, meaning their biological clock runs later than average. Their body's internal rhythm generally shifting toward a later schedule. On top of that, ADHD has a well-documented association with restless leg syndrome, the uncomfortable tingling sensation in the legs that make falling asleep impossible. Researchers believe this is driven by the same dopamine and iron deficiencies found in ADHD. Here's where it gets circular and important. Sleep deprivation makes every ADHD symptom worse. Attention, impulse control, emotional regulation, motivation, all of it degrades significantly with poor sleep. So if someone's ADHD is undertreated or undiagnosed, they sleep poorly. And because they sleep so poorly, their ADHD symptoms are much worse. And because their ADHD symptoms are much worse, they struggle even more with the routines that would help their sleep. It's a loop. And breaking it usually requires acknowledging that sleep isn't just a lifestyle issue for someone with ADHD, it's a neurological one. So let's recap. ADHD isn't primarily a focus disorder, it's a self-regulation disorder. Emotions aren't separate from ADHD, they're deeply tied to the same neurological system. Time blindness is real. It's a documented phenomenon, not an excuse. Motivation struggles have a measurable dopamine basis, not a character flaw. And sleep problems aren't a separate lifestyle issue. They're wired into the same neurobiology. None of this is about lowering expectation or giving anyone a free pass. It's about understanding what's actually happening so that the right support, the right strategies, and the right self-compassion can actually land with someone. If this has been helpful for you, please share it with someone who might need it. Whether that's someone figuring it out for themselves or someone who just doesn't get it yet. Also, if you are enjoying my videos, please like and subscribe. It really helps me. And if you have any suggestions for any more topics that you want me to talk about in ADHD or anything in general, please let me know in the comments. Until the next one, I'll catch you next time.